A billionaire boss fired his trusted nanny after finding her asleep on duty. But hours later, the mansion's CCTV showed the quiet acts of kindness no one had ever noticed, and the footage made him question whether he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Sebastian Cole had built a billion-dollar empire by believing that rules were never meant to be broken, especially when the safety of his 8-year-old daughter Lucy was involved. So when he walked into the reading room and found Charlotte Hayes, the nanny he had trusted with his only child, fast asleep beside Lucy, he didn't ask a single question. To him, there was only one truth: a nanny who sleeps on duty can never be trusted again. But what Sebastian didn't know was that the security cameras had been quietly recording far more than a single moment of exhaustion. Long before Charlotte closed her eyes for those few minutes, the CCTV had captured countless moments that no one in the mansion had ever noticed. Moments of compassion, sacrifice, and silent devotion that were never written into her job description and never done for praise. As Lucy watched her beloved nanny walk out the front door without defending herself, she whispered something that stopped even the oldest housekeeper in her tracks. Daddy doesn't know what she was really doing. But what had Charlotte been hiding behind her gentle smile? Why did she choose to leave without explaining herself? And what could a few forgotten CCTV recordings possibly reveal that would shake a billionaire boss, change a little girl's life, and make one simple act of falling asleep mean something completely different? Sebastian Cole's mansion overlooked the city like a private kingdom of glass, marble, and steel. Every sunrise reflected off its towering windows before spilling across acres of perfectly trimmed gardens. Inside, everything ran with military precision. Employees followed detailed schedules, conversations stayed professional, and every clock seemed to tick in harmony with Sebastian's disciplined life. As the founder of Cole Aviation, one of the fastest-growing private aerospace companies in the country, Sebastian had earned his fortune through relentless work, calculated risks, and an unwavering belief that discipline separated success from failure. Business magazines celebrated him as a visionary. Investors admired his precision. Yet behind the polished headlines stood a father who had quietly confused providing for his daughter with truly being present in her life. Upstairs, 8-year-old Lucy sat cross-legged beneath the library window, carefully coloring the wings of a paper butterfly. She paused every few moments, glancing toward the hallway as though waiting for footsteps she recognized better than anyone else's. When Charlotte Hayes entered carrying a stack of storybooks, Lucy's face brightened instantly. "You found the dragon book," Lucy exclaimed. Charlotte smiled warmly. "I promised I would." Promises mattered deeply to Charlotte, though few people knew why. Years earlier, when the neighborhood preschool where she had taught closed after losing its funding, she'd watched dozens of children cry because they were losing the only place that had ever felt safe to them. Walking away that final afternoon, she silently promised herself that no child under her care would ever feel forgotten. Becoming a nanny hadn't been her original dream, but it became the place where she could keep that promise alive, one child at a time. As Lucy eagerly opened the book, Charlotte discreetly noticed the little girl's untouched breakfast tray still resting on the side table. She didn't mention it. Instead, she slipped a bookmark between the pages and whispered, "We'll only start after you've had 3 bites." Lucy sighed dramatically before obeying. "You always know," she muttered. Charlotte chuckled softly, "That's my job." From the upstairs balcony, Margaret, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Cole family for more than 2 decades, watched the exchange with quiet admiration. She had seen dozens of employees come and go, yet something about Charlotte felt different. She never demanded recognition, never complained, and somehow understood Lucy's silences as clearly as other people understood words. Margaret noticed little things others overlooked. Charlotte always arrived before sunrise, she often left after everyone else, and every Friday evening she stayed behind for reasons she never explained. Margaret had asked only once. Charlotte had simply smiled. "Some kindness is meant to stay quiet." Margaret never forgot those words. Neither, though she couldn't know it yet, with the cameras silently recording every hallway of the mansion. Morning sunlight poured through the towering windows of the Cole mansion, casting long ribbons of gold across polished marble floors. Every room reflected order, wealth, and perfection, yet beneath that flawless surface lived routines so quiet that even the people sharing the same home rarely noticed one another. Sebastian had already left for Cole Aviation's headquarters before Lucy finished breakfast. His calendar was filled with board meetings, investor presentations, and negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To him, every successful deal meant another layer of security for his daughter. He never imagined that the one thing Lucy wanted most couldn't be purchased. Charlotte watched Lucy stare at the empty chair across the dining table. Your pancakes are getting cold, Charlotte said gently. Lucy forced a smile. Dad must be busy again. Charlotte didn't answer immediately. Instead, she cut the pancakes into little stars and slid the plate closer. He is busy, she replied softly, but that doesn't mean he loves you any less. Lucy nodded, though her eyes suggested she wasn't completely convinced. Later that afternoon, while Lucy worked on a drawing for school, Charlotte quietly noticed the little girl erase the same figure over and over until the paper became thin. What are you drawing? Charlotte asked. My family. Charlotte smiled. May I see? Lucy hesitated before turning the page around. It showed 3 people holding hands, but the man stood several steps away from the little girl. Charlotte's heart tightened. She knelt beside Lucy instead of correcting the picture. Families don't always stand close in drawings, she said. Sometimes they're just trying to find their way back to each other. Lucy looked up. Do you think Dad and I will? Charlotte met her eyes with calm certainty. I do. As Lucy returned to coloring, Charlotte quietly folded the drawing and placed it inside a folder she kept for Lucy's artwork. She never intended to hide it forever. Something told her Sebastian might one day need to see the picture, not because it accused him, but because it revealed what his daughter had never found the courage to say aloud. From the hallway, a security camera silently captured the moment. It seemed ordinary, almost forgettable, yet months later that brief exchange would become one of the recordings that forced Sebastian to confront the painful distance growing inside his own home. Days passed, and the rhythm inside the Cole mansion rarely changed. Every morning, Sebastian left before the sun had fully climbed over the city skyline, and every evening he returned long after the lights in Lucy's bedroom had been switched off. His company continued breaking records, making headlines for securing another international aircraft contract. Financial analysts praised his relentless work ethic, calling him the man who never stopped building. Yet the mansion that symbolized his success grew quieter with each passing day, its silence masking the conversations that never happened between father and daughter. Charlotte noticed the pattern long before anyone else. Every evening, Lucy would carry one of her favorite storybooks to the living room and sit where she could see the front entrance. Are you waiting for someone? Charlotte asked one evening, though she already knew the answer. Lucy shrugged, trying to sound casual. Dad said he might read with me tonight. Charlotte glanced at the antique grandfather clock. It was nearly 9. What book did you choose? Lucy lifted it proudly. The Secret Garden. Mom used to read it before. Her voice faded before finishing the sentence. Charlotte gently sat beside her. She never rushed Lucy whenever memories of her mother surfaced. The divorce had been peaceful, but its quietness had left invisible cracks in Lucy's heart. Her mother now lived thousands of miles away, and although they spoke often through video calls, screens could never replace bedtime hugs or shared stories. Charlotte understood that children rarely measured love by distance, they measured it by presence. Without making promises she couldn't keep, Charlotte smiled and opened the book. Let's read the first chapter together. If your dad comes home, he can finish the rest. Lucy nodded, curling up beside her. Outside the room, Margaret paused while carrying fresh linens. She watched Charlotte leave the final pages untouched before closing the book. You stopped before the ending, Margaret observed. Charlotte smiled quietly. Sometimes people need a reason to come back. Margaret looked toward the dark driveway beyond the front windows. Unknown to both women, a security camera had recorded the entire exchange, a seemingly ordinary moment that would later reveal Charlotte had been creating opportunities for a father and daughter to reconnect, never realizing how desperately that evidence would one day matter. The following Friday arrived with the same polished routine that defined life inside the Cole mansion, but Charlotte's day quietly stretched far beyond the hours printed on her schedule. After walking Lucy home from school, she helped her finish homework, listened patiently as she practiced a piano piece she insisted she wasn't good at, and applauded every improvement until the little girl's confidence slowly returned. As sunset painted the gardens in shades of amber, Lucy tugged gently at Charlotte's sleeve. Can we still make the chocolate cookies? Charlotte smiled. I thought you'd forgotten. I never forget Fridays. Together they measured flour, cracked eggs, and laughed when a small cloud of cocoa powder covered the kitchen counter. Margaret passed by carrying fresh flowers and couldn't help smiling at the joyful mess. You two look like partners in crime, she teased. Lucy giggled. They're for Dad. Margaret raised an eyebrow. For your father's meeting tomorrow. Lucy shook her head. No, just because. Charlotte carefully packed the cookies into a small tin before placing them on the kitchen island. Should we leave a note? She asked. Lucy thought for a moment, then shook her head. If he likes them, maybe next Friday he'll eat them with me. Charlotte's smile lingered, but a quiet sadness settled behind her eyes. Children rarely asked for expensive gifts. More often, they longed for moments that adults believed could wait until tomorrow. Hours later, long after her shift had officially ended, Charlotte walked through the mansion one final time to ensure Lucy's school bag was packed. Her favorite storybook rested on the bedside table and the reading room was tidy for the weekend. As she passed the security monitor near the hallway, one of the cameras briefly reflected her image before the screen switched to another corridor. She barely noticed it. What Charlotte couldn't have known was that the silent cameras were preserving every extra minute she willingly gave to the Cole family, minutes no payroll recorded and no performance review ever mentioned. Before long, those forgotten recordings would become the only witnesses capable of revealing a truth that words alone could never prove. As Charlotte quietly turned off the reading room lamp, Lucy's small voice echoed from upstairs. Miss Charlotte, will Dad be home before I fall asleep tomorrow? Charlotte looked toward the staircase, hesitating just long enough for the question to linger in the silence. I hope so, she answered softly. She truly meant it. Saturday arrived with unusual excitement inside the Cole mansion. Sebastian had canceled a business flight after an overseas client postponed their meeting, a rare decision that surprised even his executive assistant. For the first time in weeks, he would spend the afternoon at home. The staff quietly welcomed the change, hoping Lucy would finally enjoy the time she had been longing for. Charlotte saw it as another opportunity for father and daughter to reconnect, never imagining the day would end by changing all three of their lives. Lucy hurried downstairs, clutching the secret garden against her chest. Miss Charlotte, do you think Dad will read chapter 12 with me today? Charlotte smiled as she knelt to straighten Lucy's sweater. If we leave the book ready, maybe he'll surprise you. She intentionally placed the novel on the reading room table beside Sebastian's favorite coffee mug, a gentle reminder rather than a request. It wasn't the first time she had quietly created opportunities for them to spend time together. The CCTV cameras captured the small gesture, but no one watching live would have thought it important. The morning slipped away peacefully. Lucy practiced piano, they worked on a handmade bookmark for Sebastian, and Charlotte helped her write a short note that simply read, I saved the next chapter for you. Charlotte folded the note inside the book without signing her own name. She wanted the invitation to come entirely from Lucy. By early afternoon, exhaustion settled over Charlotte like a heavy blanket. She blinked several times while reading aloud, her voice slowing between paragraphs. The previous night had been unusually long after Lucy woke repeatedly from a nightmare, frightened that everyone she loved might leave her one day. Charlotte had stayed beside her until dawn, gently reassuring her that she was safe. She never mentioned the sleepless night to anyone because comforting Lucy wasn't an extra task in her mind, it was simply part of caring. Lucy leaned against Charlotte's shoulder, listening quietly as the story continued. Within moments, Charlotte's voice faded. The open book rested across her lap and fatigue finally overcame determination. She drifted into an unintended sleep, still seated beside the child she had promised to protect. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Sebastian stepped inside, briefcase in one hand, expecting to surprise his daughter with an afternoon together. Instead, his eyes locked onto one heartbreaking image, a nanny asleep on duty beside his only child. He stopped walking. The silence that followed felt heavier than words. Sebastian's expression hardened almost instantly. Years of running a billion-dollar company had trained him to make difficult decisions without hesitation, and that same instinct now took control before emotion had a chance to intervene. To him, the sight before him wasn't a tired caregiver, it was a broken rule. The memory of his younger sister's fatal boating accident flashed through his mind like a lightning strike. He had been only 15 when a family friend admitted, through tears, that the adults responsible for watching the children had become distracted. That tragedy had shaped Sebastian's belief that a single careless moment could change a life forever. Charlotte. His voice sliced through the silence. Charlotte's eyes opened at once. She looked from the open book on her lap to Lucy, who was still peacefully asleep against the cushions, then slowly stood. I'm sorry, Mr. Cole. Sebastian didn't allow her to finish. You fell asleep while responsible for my daughter. Charlotte lowered her eyes. Yes. I trusted you with the most important person in my life. I know. Margaret hurried into the room after hearing the raised voices. Sir, she began carefully, perhaps there's an explanation. There doesn't need to be one, Sebastian interrupted. The facts are right in front of us. Charlotte glanced briefly toward Lucy, who was beginning to stir. Please, she said softly, let's not wake her. Something about those words caught Margaret's attention. Even now, Charlotte's first concern wasn't herself. Sebastian took a slow breath before speaking again. Pack your things, your employment ends today. Charlotte neither argued nor pleaded. She simply nodded, accepting the decision with a quiet dignity that confused everyone in the room. As she picked up her bag, one folded envelope slipped from its side. Before anyone noticed, she calmly placed it back inside. The gesture was small, but Margaret saw it, and so did one silent security camera positioned above the reading room doorway. Charlotte turned toward the staircase one last time. May I say goodbye to Lucy? Sebastian hesitated. No. A flicker of heartbreak crossed Charlotte's face before she gently whispered, almost to herself. I hope one day you'll understand. Without another word, she walked toward the front door, leaving behind not only her job but countless untold moments that no one yet realized had quietly held the Cole family together. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the mansion with startling finality. Charlotte never looked back. She tightened her grip on the worn leather bag resting against her shoulder and walked through the iron gates, disappearing beyond the long tree-lined driveway. The security cameras followed her until she was no longer visible, quietly recording a departure that no one believed would matter again. Inside, Lucy wandered into the foyer, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Miss Charlotte, she called, her voice light with expectation. No one answered. She spotted the empty coat rack where Charlotte's cardigan had always hung and immediately looked toward Sebastian. Dad, where is she? Sebastian placed his briefcase on the console table. Charlotte won't be working here anymore. Lucy's smile vanished. What do you mean? I had to let her go. For falling asleep. Sebastian nodded. Lucy stared at him as though she had misunderstood the words. But she wasn't supposed to be awake. Margaret's head turned sharply toward Lucy. Sebastian frowned. What does that mean? Lucy looked down, twisting the sleeve of her sweater around her fingers. I promise not to tell. The room fell silent. Sebastian softened his tone. You can tell me. Lucy slowly shook her head. Miss Charlotte said promises matter. Those words lingered in the air far longer than anyone expected. Margaret quietly studied Sebastian's face. For the first time since Charlotte's dismissal, certainty gave way to hesitation. That evening, the mansion felt strangely different. Dinner was served precisely on time, yet Lucy barely touched her food. The dining room, once merely quiet, now felt empty. After a few minutes, she slid off her chair without asking permission. I'm not hungry. She disappeared upstairs before Sebastian could respond. Later that night, while reviewing documents in his home office, Sebastian noticed something resting beside his laptop. A small tin of homemade chocolate cookies. He absent-mindedly opened it and found a folded note tucked beneath the lid. I saved the next chapter for you. There was no signature. He assumed Lucy had written it herself. What he didn't know was that Charlotte had quietly encouraged Lucy to leave the note, hoping father and daughter would finally share the story they had never finished together. The CCTV had captured every step of that simple act, preserving another piece of a truth Sebastian had yet to discover. Just before midnight, Margaret knocked gently on his office door. Sir, she said carefully, the security department called. Sebastian looked up. They've found something unusual while archiving today's camera footage. For reasons he couldn't explain, a faint uneasiness settled over him. Sebastian followed Margaret through the quiet corridor leading to the mansion's security office. The room was modest compared to the grandeur surrounding it, rows of monitors, softly humming servers, and a wall of digital screens displaying every corner of the estate. Daniel Brooks, the head of security, immediately stood when Sebastian entered. Good evening, Mr. Cole. You said you found something unusual, Sebastian replied. Daniel nodded, looking uncertain. We were archiving today's footage just as company policy requires after an employee's dismissal. One of my officers noticed a pattern that didn't seem ordinary. Sebastian folded his arms. What kind of pattern? Daniel hesitated before pressing a key on the keyboard. I think it's easier if I show you. The footage rolled backward. Not hours. Days. The screen displayed Charlotte arriving at the mansion before sunrise. Her shift officially began at 7:30, yet every recording showed her entering through the staff entrance nearly 40 minutes early. She never clocked in until her scheduled time. Instead, she quietly walked through the nursery, opened the curtains just enough to let the morning light in, arranged Lucy's books, and checked that her school uniform was neatly prepared. No overtime requests, Sebastian asked. Daniel shook his head. None. Another recording appeared. Charlotte noticed Lucy's favorite stuffed rabbit with a torn ear. Rather than throwing it away or reporting it to housekeeping, she sat at the dining table during her own break, carefully stitching it by hand. When Lucy found it later, she hugged the toy so tightly that Charlotte simply smiled and walked away before the little girl could thank her. Sebastian remained silent. Daniel continued. We thought these were isolated moments. He clicked again. A different day. Charlotte quietly picked up a family photograph that had fallen from a shelf. It showed Sebastian holding Lucy several years earlier at a beach, both laughing freely. She gently dusted the frame before placing it back exactly where it had been. Moments later, Lucy wandered into the room. I miss when Dad smiled like that, she whispered. Charlotte looked at the photograph for a long moment before kneeling beside her. Sometimes people forget how to smile, she said softly. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them. Daniel paused the video. No one knew these conversations happened. For the first time since firing Charlotte, Sebastian wasn't watching an employee. He was watching someone quietly protecting pieces of his family that he hadn't even realized were breaking. Neither man spoke for several moments. The soft hum of the security monitors seemed louder than before as Sebastian stared at the frozen image of Charlotte kneeling beside Lucy. It wasn't simply what she had done that unsettled him. It was how naturally she had done it, never once looking toward the cameras, never expecting anyone to notice. Keep going, Sebastian said quietly. Daniel nodded and resumed the playback. Another morning appeared on the screen. Lucy sat alone at the breakfast table, absent-mindedly pushing fruit around her plate. Charlotte noticed immediately. Instead of urging her to eat, she reached into a kitchen drawer, took out a napkin, and folded it into the shape of a butterfly. Lucy laughed. That one's prettier than yesterday's. So you noticed, Charlotte teased. I notice everything. So do I, Charlotte replied with a smile. Lucy finished every bite. Sebastian frowned. She'd stopped eating breakfast for weeks after Charlotte left. Daniel glanced at him but said nothing. The next recording began. Lucy stood outside the front door after returning from school, clutching a certificate with both hands. She looked toward the driveway every few seconds. Charlotte walked over. Waiting for your dad. Lucy nodded excitedly. I got first place in the reading contest. Hours passed in fast forward. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Luxury cars came and went. Employees changed shifts. Lucy never moved from the front steps. At last, Charlotte draped her cardigan over the little girl's shoulders. He must be very busy, Lucy whispered, struggling to hide her disappointment. Charlotte gently squeezed her hand. He'd never choose work over you on purpose. Those words struck Sebastian harder than any accusation could have. She had protected his image in his daughter's heart, even when he hadn't deserved it. Daniel opened one final clip from the same evening. Charlotte quietly entered Sebastian's study after everyone had gone upstairs. She placed Lucy's reading contest certificate neatly in the center of his desk, beside the files for the following day's board meeting. She never left a note. She simply hoped he would see it. Sebastian slowly lowered his eyes. I never opened those files that night, he admitted. The meeting was moved. Daniel looked back at the screen. So the certificate stayed there until housekeeping cleared the desk 2 days later. Sebastian closed his eyes. The realization settled over him like a crushing weight. He hadn't just missed one important moment. He had missed dozens. And every single time, Charlotte had quietly tried to bring him back to his daughter without ever asking for recognition. For the first time in years, the billionaire who had built an empire by paying attention to every detail realized he had overlooked the details that mattered most. Sebastian remained in the security office long after Daniel and Margaret had quietly excused themselves. One by one, the CCTV recordings continued to play across the monitors, not dramatic rescues or extraordinary feats, but countless ordinary moments that now carried extraordinary meaning. Charlotte tying Lucy's shoelaces before school. Charlotte waiting outside the piano room until Lucy found the courage to perform. Charlotte silently reminding Sebastian's assistant about Lucy's parent-teacher meeting without ever claiming credit. Every act had been done with the same quiet intention, keeping a father and daughter connected without making herself the center of their story. He finally understood why Charlotte had accepted her dismissal without defending herself. If she had argued, the conversation would have become about proving she was right. Instead, she had left with her dignity, trusting that the truth would eventually speak louder than she ever could. Early the next morning, Sebastian drove across town to the modest neighborhood where Charlotte rented a small townhouse. It was a world away from the luxury of the Cole estate, yet the flower boxes beneath the windows were carefully tended, and children's drawings decorated the front door. Before he could knock, Charlotte opened it, surprised but composed. "Mr. Cole, I came to apologize." She studied him quietly. "I watched the footage," he continued, "not the few minutes when you fell asleep, the months before it." Charlotte lowered her eyes. "There was no need." "There was every need," Sebastian replied. "I judged one moment and ignored everything that led to it." For the first time since they had met, Sebastian's voice carried no authority, only regret. "I can't ask you to erase what happened," he said, "but I can tell you the truth. My daughter wasn't just cared for by you, she became happier because of you, and I was too blind to see it." Charlotte remained silent for a long moment before answering. "I never wanted Lucy to love me more than she loved her father. I know. I wanted her to believe you would always come back." Sebastian's eyes filled with emotion as he realized she had spent months protecting a bond he himself had neglected. "I don't deserve the grace you've shown us," he admitted. "No one earns grace," Charlotte said gently. "That's why it's called grace." Weeks passed before Charlotte agreed to visit the Cole mansion again, not as an employee but as a welcome guest at Lucy's birthday celebration. This time Sebastian was waiting at the front door with Lucy beside him. Instead of rushing to work, he spent the afternoon reading The Secret Garden, finally finishing the chapter they had once left incomplete. Lucy smiled through every page, occasionally glancing at Charlotte, who watched quietly from the garden with Margaret. Seasons changed, and so did the Cole household. Laughter slowly replaced silence. Dinner was shared together instead of alone. Business remained important, but family no longer waited until tomorrow. Through school events, community literacy programs, and ordinary weekends, Sebastian and Charlotte grew to know one another not as employer and nanny, but as two adults who believed that children deserved to feel seen. Respect became friendship. Friendship in time became love. Years later, one framed image occupied a place of honor in Sebastian's private study. It wasn't a magazine cover celebrating another business triumph or a photograph from an award ceremony. It was a still image taken from the mansion's CCTV. Charlotte asleep in the reading room with an open book resting across her lap, Lucy peacefully beside her. Whenever visitors asked why such an ordinary picture mattered so much, Sebastian would simply smile and say, "That was the day I almost lost the person who quietly taught me what truly mattered." Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are never performed for applause. They unfold in ordinary moments, unnoticed by the world, until one day someone finally chooses to look closely enough to see them.